Hi, my name is LZ Granderson. Some of you may know me as co-host of Sedano and LZ on ESPNLA 710. Some of you may know me from being on various networks talking about important topics of the day, like this one. Police, the community, building trust between minorities, and recruiting more minorities, which is very important to me. As an African-American male living in Los Angeles, trust when I say this summer reconciliation has touched me not just professionally, but personally. And I'm really excited to have a wide-ranging conversation today with two members of the LAPD. And we're going to talk about these issues. Some of the conversation is going to be uncomfortable. Some of it is going to be very enlightening. But hopefully at the end of it, you'll find value in your time spent in this conversation that we're having.
My name is Aaron McCraney, and I am the commanding officer of Recruitment and Employment Division. I am the captain, and I've been on the job for about 29 years. Have a phenomenal career, have a phenomenal experience, and I welcome this opportunity to share what my life has been like on this job and how I think it could benefit others, and also bridge the gap between, the perceived gaps between the police and the community in this times of COVID-19 and civil unrest.
I'm Officer Kim Gibson. I'm currently assigned to Recruitment Division as well. Have over 13 years on the job, and I'm also looking forward to this conversation and enlightening the community in what we've experienced as officers during this time, and hopefully we can learn from each other.
Thank you both very much for having me. And I believe the most important question right now, anyway, is why did you two decide to become involved in law enforcement?
I am born, raised, reared from the city of Los Angeles. That's where my whole life exposure has been. Growing up in the city, I've always had a respect for law enforcement. I've always had a high opinion. After I got out of high school, I actually got into banking, but in the back of my mind, policing always was something that I had in mind. I remember I was working at a bank, and I had a high school classmate of mine that came to the bank, and he was in his uniform, and I remember thinking how proud I was of him, and I told everyone in the office, hey, this is my friend, and the respect that he presented and he represented really moved me and really made me go back to my thought about even though I was in banking, I was doing very well, I still had a thought and a passion that I wanted to be in law enforcement, and that really inspired me to take on the task and take a look at it to see how it worked for me. And I can tell you that when I actually made the move, that it's been phenomenal. Like, I cannot believe, I had no idea the experiences I would have, the opportunities that would be presented to me, the things that I've seen, the things that I've done. It's actually, when I look back, I'm so pleased and so overwhelmed, and I think that that was the best decision that I could have made. The contacts, the communities, it's been amazing for me.
How old were you when you made the transition from your banking profession into law enforcement?
Yeah, I was actually in my late 20s when I actually came on the job. So I was pretty much set into this career of banking and decided, let me make a different move here.
Your story is slightly different,
Yes.
Correct?
It is, but like my captain, I also was born and raised here in LA, and I went to Westchester High School, played basketball there. You can see I'm tall, 6'3", so I've played ball. And I was fortunate enough to get a scholarship to go to USC, so I played ball there.
Fight on.
Fight on. And I really wanted to pursue a career in professional basketball at first. I was thinking that was going to be my trajectory, that was my path. However, maybe around my junior, senior year, I started to think, you know what, I have a gift. I have a gift. I can speak to people. I'm good with conversation and just allowing people to see through to who I am, being fair, and all those qualities that an officer does have. So around junior, senior year, also a funny story, while I was playing ball, there was a captain, my captain that actually preceded him, or Anita Ortega. She was a basketball player, and she was also a NC2A women's referee. And so she was refereeing my games, and she would always tell me, when are you going to come on LAPD. Like she was trying to recruit like even during the game. So back then I would just tell her to leave me alone. Like I am trying to play right now. I'm not worried about LAPD. But she knew that because she knew my father, and I should have started with that. My dad did 32 years on the job. So I was always connected to it, but I didn't know if that was the route I wanted to take. My mother was a civilian. She worked at our 77th Street station back in the 80s. So I've always had that connection to LAPD. Transitioning out of college after I graduated, I did play professional basketball overseas. And after my one season, I played in China. We won the championship. It was great. And I said, you know what? Because I'm a career-focused kind of person, I wanted to get started. So I was 22 when I started to apply. And then by the time I got on the job, I was 23. So I said I wanted to get it done and get it started. And my dad was probably the most influential with allowing me the space to choose what I wanted to do. And my family just supported me. So grateful for that.
Well, obviously, you two are no strangers to the climate around the country right now, particularly right here at home. What has it been like for the two of you to be officers of color during a moment of racial reconciliation in the country where law enforcement is the centerpiece of that reconciliation?
Yeah, you know, it's very interesting times for us as police officers and also African American. We're kind of like in this in-between area. Like we're kind of like in both worlds because we understand the concerns that come from the African American community because we grew up in the city of LA and we dealt with the same issues. But also as police officers, we also have a different perspective because we understand it from that side too. So trying to bring those two worlds together is a task that we have to make it a brighter and clearer future for LA, for policing, and for the African American community.
Same. It's been difficult to navigate and try to metabolize everything that's happening in the different sectors of our world. We're at work, we're with our families, we have our friends. They all have questions, they all have perceptions, and we're, as a Black officer, we're constantly either deflecting or agreeing or trying to separate the two. So it's been quite a task, I will say, for an African-American woman who's a police officer, because I have that trifecta, right? So it's been difficult to try to navigate it all, but we're doing it. We have to, because we have to press forward. And we can't just say, forget it, right? We have to press forward. We have to figure it out with each other first, and then, with the community. And I was speaking to my father about everything that's going on, and he just said, you know what, there's always waves of police activity and police environments. And he kind of compared it like, this is what he went through, you went through, in 92, right? And then before that, 65. So there's these waves, and we have to ride them. The community has to ride them. We have to ride them, and we all have to get better and grow. Growth is key.
One of the things that have occurred during this summer of racial reconciliation has been a reevaluation of the way that municipalities, including Los Angeles, choose to police. Reimagining is now the buzzword. And in that reimagining, $150 million has been diverted from the police budget to other aspects of the community. The first question is, how do you feel about that number being redirected? And two, what's this impact in terms of what you're trying to do, particularly in terms of recruiting and diversity recruiting specifically?
So when it comes to the concept of reimagining, I can tell you that law enforcement is for it. There are many things that we do that we don't necessarily want to do or feel that we should be doing.
Such as?
Well, dealing issues with homelessness, dealing with issues with mental illness. Those are some things come right off the top of my head that, perhaps could be better served somewhere else. But the problem is that, the police department is the most visible form of government, right? And when you have another entity to handle, it kind of just falls on the back of the police department. I think that we're open to that. The question is, who's going to do it? And I don't think no one's really come up with that answer yet. The one thing about the police department, when it comes to like emergency response, LAPD, we can get to you within, 7 minutes. City of LA is 464 square miles. So what other entity are you going to have out there that's going to be in the Harbor Division to respond to the West Valley in a reasonable amount of time? So this is, some of the concerns that need to be worked out. My biggest thing is that absolutely, let's do it. Let's create it. Let's find these other entities and let's put them in place. But when you do that, you have to make sure, like the defund, they took away $150 million, right? But we still have the responsibility. So if you take the money, you have to also reallocate, those responsibilities. Now, how's it impacted us? It's been huge, because I can tell you last year, I'm in charge of recruitment and hiring. I hired 513 police officers. And by hiring 513, I'm just keeping above water. I was just meeting attrition. So because the money was taken away, that number has been cut to less than half. I'm budgeted right now for about 250 police officers. And so that's huge, because as I look at crime stats, the stats they're going up. Homicides are up this year. Victims shot are up this year. So again, I'm going to have less police officers to be able to respond to higher crimes. So that is a huge concern for me and for the department.
But if your police officers aren't being asked to address someone who may be having an episode, say in downtown, would that feasibly be resources you could dedicate towards violent crimes then?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That could be. And again, we need to identify what entity that is and put them in place to make that happen. Because as I mentioned, $150 million is gone, but we still have the responsibilities to respond out there with less resources.
And Officer Gibson, there's about 18% of the population within LAPD that are women. When you hear that he's going to be hiring fewer people, when you look at those numbers, that means fewer women proportionately. Mm-hmm. Why is that such an issue for this force?
Finding women who do want to do this and do want to excel in this field, which is completely doable, can prove itself difficult. But when you talk about hiring and the fact that we are going to be hiring less women, and in 5 years, we're going to be down even more women due to retirements and things of that nature, it's incumbent upon us right now in recruitment to forcibly go out and try everything that we can to get more women to come on this job. I personally think that women make great cops. Because I just think that we're able to really connect on a personal level with people, just the natural nurturers that we tend to be, and we can resolve conflict, I think. I'm not going to say better, but in a different manner that sometimes works out better to whatever situation is going on. So call me biased, right? But I just think I want to see Chief wants, 50%, so do I. I think that would be great. I've always championed for women to know that they can do this and they can do it well and they can excel in police work, in military, in whatever other people might think women should not be, where they shouldn't be, or what they can't do. So as far as being on the LAPD, yes, it's going to be a problem, and we have to battle that as best we can in recruitment and getting that word out that women are welcome. We want women on this job, and we have to do everything we can to make that happen.
Well, it's key because you brought up that women make up more than 50% of the population. And we're probably about a little bit over 18%, just under 19%. but it is an initiative. It is a goal for this department to increase our numbers. For this fiscal year, my goal is to get 40% of all the academy recruits female. And that is amazing considering, where we have been in the past. And I can tell you this last class, we had a class of 57% women. And that's never happened before. And, we're so excited because of the opportunity of actually making some gains in that area. We just had our first virtual women's hiring seminar, and that was phenomenal. We probably had 400 women. It was one male and 400 and
one male was on the
and 438 females that actually showed up for that event. So that's very encouraging.
Did he get his dates mixed up or something like that? Why was he on the call?
Yeah. I applaud him. I applaud him for showing up.
We'll take him.
Yeah.
We'll take him. We'll figure out the other part later.
Yeah. But so we're looking at different avenues and different ways of reaching out. But diversity is huge for this department, and the outreach and the efforts that we're making is huge. But I want to say it doesn't mean that we don't want anyone else. We want everyone.
Oh, yeah.
We just want to make sure that we have it's inclusive of everyone. We don't want to make sure that no one is left out. Like right now, I probably have 185 African American females on this job. Is it? No, that's not. No.
180,
Yeah,
186?
Yeah, somewhere around there.
186, and the force is near 10,000?
Correct.
Yes.
So, I want to do better.
You're lonely.
Absolutely.
No,
Yes.
No,
seriously.
yeah.
Yeah, and it's kind of like one of those things where me personally, I want to rely on every other woman in law enforcement. I don't care if you're LAPD, anywhere else, and go out, and we're all recruiters, right? We all have to be mouthpieces for law enforcement because our division is 30 people, as far as like who's responsible for recruiting on LAPD. But my charge has always been to my cohort is to recruit. Every time you talk about the job, you're recruiting, right? So let that be in a truthful manner, in a positive manner, and in an encouraging manner to whoever you're talking to who's interested. And if it preferably, right, if it's a woman, you're able to, this is what I tell them, like you're able to really dig deep and let that woman know that you can do this. If we're talking to a man, yes, you're needed to do this. And so my charge has always been to everybody on this job, if you see someone who is qualified and who you believe can succeed as a police officer, recruit them and be their mentor. But especially for women, we have to just keep up what we're doing and keep the fight. I know my captain said we had the virtual hiring seminar, and I received probably about 10 calls, Captain, where women who were on the fence, they went to that or tuned into that women's seminar, and they're ready to hop back in the process. So that was just me. And if every person received that same call, that's some pretty good numbers, right? That people who were inspired. And so we plan on having more. And hopefully we just continue by virtual means with our crew to get the word out as much as possible.
And, we're still doing a lot of work with our faith-based organizations. Mm-hmm. Actually, Officer Gibson and I met with a reverend recently, and he introduced us to some young men, African American, who live in the community and have high aspirations of being police officers. Mm-hmm. So I know there's this feeling, there's this thought out there that, why would you want to be a police officer? And no one's African American want to be a police officer. And I can tell you that's not true. And it's a very important point. And the message I always put out there is that while you can make change from the outside by all the measures that is going on, and I appreciate that, I applaud that, I believe that in order to really move that change forward, it has to be done from the inside. I appreciate the position I'm in as the commanding officer of recruitment and hiring. So that means that every person that gets hired for the LAPD, I make that decision on behalf of the chief of police. So I affect what's going to happen for generations. For the next 30 years is going to be a result of decisions that I make today. So I think it's very important to have someone of color in this position to make those decisions. And this is just one example of, I think, how the police department is very progressive in moving forward in addressing issues of diversity, of racial inclusion, and racial equity.
Well, since you brought it up,
Oh.
let's just be real for a second.
Okay.
The events over the last few months has not necessarily been a banner sort of string of events in terms of making officers or the process of law enforcement or criminal justice in general look bright. Whether you're talking about the video with George Floyd, whether you're talking about how the officers handled or did not handle the situation in Atlanta or in the Atlanta area with Ahmaud Arbery. Obviously, we know about Breonna Taylor. But even here at home, we have officers now who are being investigated for falsifying police reports. When you hear these stories, one after another, is it any mystery why recruiting African Americans in particular might be difficult?
No, and I totally get it. I totally understand that. And I can tell you that wrong is wrong. And when someone does wrong, they should not be a part of this police department or any police department. We make millions, literally millions of contacts. And the phenomenal things that police officers do on a day-to-day basis doesn't necessarily, get publicized. People don't hear about, people don't know. Again, I'm from the community. My family is from here. And I can tell you that, generally speaking, people have very good thoughts about the police department. And they want the police department. They support the police department. They don't support when things are done wrong, and things can always be better. But in my career, and I've gone through the different levels, but I can tell you I've worked in 77th Division. I worked Southwest Division. As being a watch commander, I can't tell you how many times I've seen officers who've done phenomenal things when they've taken families and given of themselves. They've given their own money, they've taken food, they've held babies, the things that police officers do on a day-to-day basis that never gets out there, but more accurately reflects who they really are.
Let's shift gears for a second. You're playing basketball, minding your own business, and the referee is trying to recruit you. What do you guys look for new recruits? Who do you look for in terms of being an officer in the city?
So for
me, is it a hook shot?
So me personally, right now my position is a mentor or an advisor. Once we recruit, once the individual is in the process, I now have direct contact. I'm trying to get to know who this person is and send them successfully through the hiring process. So when I ask the questions, I'm asking about where they grew up. I'm asking about if they did go to college, what high school did they go to, what was high school like. I'm asking about situations where I can find out if this person can successfully or has proven that they've adapted to diverse environments in the past, right? Because then we transition to the department interview, and those are some of the questions. So we talk about these kind of things. Where have you been in positions, whether it be work, whether it be school? Are you well traveled? Have you been out, and do you seek situations where you're in different spaces? I think that is very important because, as we know, we always refer to LA as a melting pot, right? There's everything here. So you're not just going to be, you're not going to only encounter one or two races or even three. It's not just white, black, Hispanic in LA. So those are some of the things I look for. I also look for...
And what would be sort of a disqualifying answer in your mind? If you ask someone about their background, what would you hear that would be like going, maybe they're not better suited for this profession?
One message that I really want to get out there is that we're not looking for perfection. We're not looking for perfect people. I understand, life happens, things get in the way, but it's more about what did you do? How did you adapt from that? We go from the standpoint of the whole person. You may have had some issues, you may have some problems here, but let me look at some of the other things that you've done. And maybe you did a couple things here, but all these great things here, and this far outweighs that.
Like, give us an example of what would be like great things, like helping an old lady across the street, raking leaves. Like, what are you looking for?
I think simply overcoming your circumstance and where you came from. And I had a young lady, she's foster care, in and out the system, foster care system. She's worked, went to school, had a child, raising her child. And it's things that when you're dealt a bad hand and you can still, like my captain said, make something of yourself, even with no real family village around you. I look at that as somebody who can relate to just about anything, right? And who can adapt and overcome. And when it's nothing really specific. Like, I don't hear one thing and say, oh, you can't. I have to hear it all. And it has to be a totality of everything that I hear from an individual. For me, and I'm not making any decisions, right? But I'm also getting a feel for who I'm mentoring through this process. So for me personally, I champion for so many people that I talk to. So I think overcoming a bad circumstance is something that at my level, I'm able to look at and say, okay, good for you. So what else do you have? What else can you give to our department?
Yeah, we're just looking for what any organization or institution would look for. We're looking for good people, people that make good decisions, people that are progressive, people that are productive, just in your industry or any other industry.
We are terrible people in my industry. Do not use us as a barometer.
I don't know. We've had a couple that as a matter of fact, I have 2 young men that I am looking at right now that we're in the NFL, and I'm going to very well maybe hiring them very soon. So we pull from all over.
So walk me through the process, right? So you identify someone in the community who you think may make a good officer. How do you get them into the academy? What is the academy is like, and what is the transition from the academy to the actual police force?
Well, I'll start with, I can tell you, becoming a police officer is probably one of the most difficult experiences one would ever have when it comes to getting a job. We have a 7-step process, and it begins when you have to take a written exam. And then after the written exam, you have to do what's called a personal history statement. And that's like a 27-page application where you tell everything about your life, everything that you've ever done, everything you experienced, whatever job you have, wherever you lived. And then from there, we go to, you have to have a department interview where you interview with a panel of people. And then we have a polygraph exam that you have to take, which validates information that you said on that initial personal history statement. And then after that, we have a medical exam that you have to pass. And then once you pass all that, then you have to go to background investigations. And that's when they go out and they verify and they ask people and they talk to people about you and who you are as a person and whether or not you would make a good police officer.
You guys investigated all 10,000 of the officers that are in the force today.
Yes.
In that manner.
Yes, a very thorough investigation. But I'm not done.
Yeah, I was going to say, and then...
And then after the background investigation, you have to take a psychological examination. So you meet with a psychologist to, kind of go over your person, who you are, and, your fit in law enforcement. And then after you go through all that, then you can be certified to be considered to be hired. So it is a very tough and grueling process. And we end up, deselecting a lot of people because of this. There have been some concerns about that. Some people in the community, African-American community, has felt that, they've been unfairly deselected.
Weeded out?
Yeah, through this process. And again,
is there any validity to that?
What's happening today is that we're looking very, very closely at things that perhaps people were disqualified for in the past. And this comes directly from the chief. Some people in the past have been disqualified for, perhaps it was for, the thing that I hear all the time is association. I grew up in this neighborhood, and because I have an uncle, I had a neighbor, so on and so forth. I got disqualified for that. Well, I can tell you that that's not happening. There's been concerns about finances. You know, I get disqualified for my credit. I get disqualified for, you know, bills I haven't paid. These are all very important things because we want people that have good credit. We want people to pay their bills. But it's something that I can look closer at and, again, look at the whole person and say, okay, well, this person has had some problems here. However, they are responsible in every other aspect of their life. Maybe if they had this good paying job, maybe they will help them to be able to pay those
The starting
bills.
pay is about $67,000.
Yes,
Is that correct?
67,000.
That's pretty good money.
And with full benefits, full benefits starting day one. When you start the academy, you get full benefits. Yeah.
So once you go through the strenuous process to be considered, and you've actually made it into the academy and you go through the training for that, what happens next?
So I've had the opportunity to work at the academy for 3 years. I was instructor to our in-service officers and also to our recruits. And the academy, it's tough. You know, we finished this process, the hiring process, and now you go into a whole nother stage of really, I call it the second hiring process. Yeah, you're hired, but you got to make it through academy to actually, you know, be a police officer and obtain your post certificate. So I always try to tell people when I am fortunate enough to speak to them after they're certified and after they're appointed, I'm like, now this is the hiring process. Okay. So when you get in there, give it everything that you have. It's a sterile environment. However, it's meant to cause and induce stress. You have to prove yourself, right? So it's strenuous in that regard, and 6 months of it, and you have to get together as a group, as a class. It's not individual. So I always liken it to teamwork. That's why I'm always looking for athletes, you know, people who can work together as part of a team and bring a certain group of people through something, because that's what the academy is like. When you talk about academy, that's the second hiring phase for me. That's what I consider it to be. It's very doable, but it takes commitment, it takes discipline, and that's some of the things that I try to glean from someone when I'm talking to them. Do I think this person can make it to that second hiring phase and make it through it? And so that's just me and getting my own feel for an individual. But we know what it takes. Like we get you through this, we get you appointed, right? And now you have to get through this second phase. There's actually a third phase, and that's making it off probation once you do get out in the streets. But the academy that's up next. So
LZ, let me ask you a question. Me being in charge of hiring, let me ask you, what is your expectation? What would you want me to look for when it comes to the people that I select and hire to come on the Los Angeles Police Department?
First and foremost, mental stability. I'm sure a lot of people will be glad to know that you simulated stressful environments as much as possible. But I think that for a lot of people, myself included at times, when I hear that someone has been on the force multiple times and still have a whole slew of infractions or complaints against them, I wonder what's being done from a mental health aspect to see whether or not there's a larger issue here. And not just in terms of, you know, this officer is racist. I think sometimes that's oversimplifying the conversation. Maybe the officer is overstressed. Maybe the officer isn't who you thought she or he was in the hiring process. And so the mental stability, the mental aspect of it to me is very important because it is a dangerous job. And I recognize that. I think every American recognizes that. But that still doesn't mean that we want to see an officer with 20 infractions patrolling our streets. There has to be some sort of consistency there. And then I think the other thing that I personally think is really important is just someone who looks like the city in which they're serving. You know, that doesn't mean you have to have these hard-edged quotas, because I think that could lead you down the wrong path in terms of recruiting. However, when I was covering Ferguson during that uprising years ago, one of the things that was very apparent to me in my reporting was that as I visited the barbershops, as I visited the soul food restaurants, and I asked, hey, have you guys seen Ferguson officers in any of these spaces? The number of times I kept hearing no informed me as to why the city was in the sort of environment that it was in. Because the officers are supposed to be a part of and reflect the community, but if the only time you interact with people of color is in a police environment where danger is high and tensions are high, well, no wonder you may harbor some biases, because the only exposure to minorities is in this stressful situation, and you haven't even gone to the soul food restaurant to get a piece of cornbread yet and see how mama's doing, which is, to me, an important part of policing the community. So those, to me, are very important. The mental stability, and then also, do you look like the community that you're serving? And if you don't, why? Sometimes it's not nefarious. Sometimes if a city is 35% African Americans, but you only have 10% of African Americans in the police force, that's not necessarily a byproduct of racist practices as much as a situation or a municipality that has racial implications. I don't think those two are the same thing. So those are very important to me. And then number 3, I need you to be courageous. And I know when people hear that with officers, it's like going, well, of course they're courageous. No, I mean, when you are with someone or with a group of other officers and things are being said that aren't proper, when you witness this practicing that you know goes against your policies, I need you to be courageous in that situation to report, to identify, to correct, to intervene if necessary. Because if those officers in Minneapolis were courageous, Mr. Floyd might be alive today. There was one officer with his knee on the man's neck. There were other officers who were witnessing it, and no one was courageous. So those 3 things to me are important. And I don't know how you find courage. I don't know how you stimulate an environment to elicit courage, but I think without question, that kind of courage is necessary to make sure that your fine profession doesn't get tainted by the rotten apples who seem to dominate the airways.
And I would think that you will find that police officers would totally agree with everything that you said. I can't imagine me being a captain or me going back being a police officer being in that same situation and not taking the action that you think and everyone else think that should have been taken. This thought that we would not do that, I think that's inaccurate. Again, I can't speak to every situation, but generally speaking, if we see something that's wrong, we're going to address it. We won't turn a blind eye and just allow for people to be done wrong. And I just wish there was a better way that we can get that message across. Right. The one thing in policing is that we don't really talk a lot about the good things that we do. We just think that's a part of the job, and we don't come back and say, oh yeah, well I did this, I did that. But I think that overall you will find that people in law enforcement don't condone that type of activity. I'm not familiar with that technique. We don't use that technique here. And if one of us would see something like that, we definitely would stop that from happening.
And I think when you talk about different departments, I call that courageous and just being a leader, all right, in your own sense. But for me, when I'm out there and I see something going down that's not supposed to, even if most of the time it's for a selfish reason, you're not going to drag me into that. So I'm going to stop that. It's not the most comfortable thing, but it's necessary, and I've done it.
Recognizing that law enforcement is a very honorable profession, but it's a profession, so that means people want to get paid. Right? People want to know, what do I get out of this? So once you've made it through the 1, 2, 3 interviews in order to make it through the academy, what's a trajectory for a rookie police officer in terms of progressing through the ranks in their field, in their career?
So I'll start. We both worked at the academy at one point in our career. When you come on this job, your first 18 months, you forget about it because you are learning. You go on 6 months in the academy, and then after you do your 6 months, you do a full year in patrol where you're learning the foundation and you're understanding what police work is. Once you pass that 18-month probationary period, now doors start opening up for you where you can start looking at some other opportunities. where you can look at doing some specialized work, or you can work in vice, you can work in narcotics, you can do some investigative things. But once you get past that and you build a good foundation, you can actually start looking at promoting on the department. So we have different levels of ranks where you can go from, you start out as a police officer 1, that means you're brand new and you're just learning. Then you go to police officer 2, police officer 3, and then from there, there's opportunities to go to different ranks. So we have the sergeant rank, we have the detective rank, and then those are 2 different paths you can take to progress in your career. And it leads him further from there, from detective, sergeant, you have lieutenant, you have captain, you have commander, you have the chief level. And so we always talk about the main difference between us, I think, and most police agencies, as you mentioned, we have 10,000 officers. We cover 464 square miles, right? That means there's a lot of opportunity. We always say we have over 250 jobs that you can do. I tell people that whatever you love to do outside the police department, there's a way to do it inside the police department. For example, me, I had a passion for youth programs and kids and helping them, inner city kids. And because of that, I created a youth center. So again, as a police officer, and some people may have a problem with that. Oh, you're a police officer, you shouldn't be doing that. But again, it's about community engagement and connecting with the community and being able to. What's this community center? That was when I worked in the Rampart area, during that time period when things were going in Rampart, and we were doing some very positive things in the community to connect and get youth off the streets and get them doing some positive things. So if you want to.
So as far as the timing, you said like what's the timing like? It depends on the officer themselves. When you feel like you're ready, you take the test, and then you get like banded on a list, right? So normally after probation, you need about 3 years. Actually, the minimum requirement is 3 years of patrol or traffic division, something that shows that you've been out there, you've learned a lot. Now you're eligible to take a test, either for detective or for sergeant. You take that test, you get on the list, and you just wait your turn, type of thing. So that can happen at any stage in someone's career, right? What makes us special, LAPD, is that the opportunity, besides me, right? Smaller departments, there's not a lot of movement going on, right? Because the numbers are smaller. So I tell people if they're wanting to go, I won't name any other department, but if they're wanting to go to a smaller department versus a larger department, and you have aspirations to promote, it's going to take probably three times longer than it would here to do the same thing. All right. So because the people who are there, they're not leaving those positions anytime soon. We have a lot of rapid turnover. We hire a lot. It means that people are going to retire. It means that positions need to be filled. Make your way, right? So it all depends on that individual and how soon they want to promote and what direction they want to go in. For me personally, I've loved to jump around. I've been in youth programs. I've been a YSO, a youth service officer. I wanted to work juveniles. I did 2 tours in traffic. Our traffic division responded to DUITCs. I know how to handle any traffic collision out there. That's the expertise that I wanted. And then I also wanted to make a pass at recruitment, our division of what I'm doing now. And one thing you have to understand is when you promote, yes, those opportunities can come along, but not as quickly as they can on a police officer level. So I tell people when I'm talking to them and they have an interest in doing, forensics or fingerprinting, and some people really get into, they want to be a homicide detective. And I said, okay, now you can go and work with homicide detectives as a police officer and learn, right? But once you become a homicide detective, you can't go and now go work somewhere else. Like, you're a homicide detective for that particular amount of time. So with the 250 job opportunities, you can bounce around and get all the expertise you want to get, and then say, you know what, now I'm gonna take the test and promote. So you have that freedom on this job. And I always try to let people know that as soon as when I talk to them. What is it that you want to do? Some people want to spend their entire career in patrol. Fine, do it. If you're good at it, do it. Nothing wrong with that. But other people, they want to get out, they want to do this. People might be surprised that we have sports teams. I've played basketball on this department for 12 years.
Isn't that cheating?
No.
You were a D1 player.
I know.
That played
Most of my teammates are
professionally.
D1 players too. Gold. That's all we do is get gold in the world. Just want to put that out there. But there's a football team. There's a men's and women's basketball team. There's a soccer team. Any
Baseball,
sport that's out there.
Yeah, we have police Olympics.
We have it. And so there's so many different things to do, if it's not dealing with the job itself. Our community relations division, you can go out and create programs and do all kind of cool things. So it just depends on that individual officer and how quickly, and what they want to do, how quickly they promote and move through the ranks. But
the opportunity is there.
Quicker.
The individual kind of dictates. Like she mentioned, some people remain in patrol, or some people decide they want to go on and do other things. So the key thing is that the opportunity is there, and especially now, there's so much movement. There was a huge hiring push in the late '80s and the early '90s, and now all those people are retiring, and so that means there's a lot more opportunity for those that are coming in and those that are moving up through the system. So the future looks very bright for anyone who has some ambition to do well.
Is the academy like college? Like, is there any out-of-pocket fees for people who want to be an officer?
So that's something that's unique with us. We have our own academy, and from day one, you get paid. No expenses. You have some minor expenses, like you have to pay for, your uniform and, things like that. But generally speaking, it's a full paid academy.
Yeah. Well, that's not bad at all.
it's not bad. And
So
you
why do
step
people
right
think
into
it is?
Because they don't know. They're just not informed. JoinLAPD.com has that information. You call us, you ask the questions you want to know, you're informed.
Yeah,
So-
it's so important, especially in this day and age, to be a part, to make that difference. You have to come on and make those changes. Again, we both grew up in the city, right? And we've had some exposure, we had the experience. So being on both sides, I can tell you that the things that I've done, the access that I have, I've gone to a whole nother level. And, it is my goal as I'm in the twilight of my career to make sure that I have people that follow behind me to take this, this mission further than where it is. We've gone a long way, and, there's still further to go. And I want to make sure that we get some good people in to make that happen.
So to your point, because of the mass retirements that you're expecting, there's going to be a lot of new blood, a lot of fresh voices that are going to be introduced to the force. Are there any avenues that they can take to make sure that their perspective or their experiences are included in the larger body?
Absolutely. I think that even though we teach and we bring them into our culture, they also teach us. They bring us, their ways. I always talk to my people when we talk about the people that we bring in, is that we need to also, learn from them. Their technology, their way of seeing things, like they are the future. Like we're not. We have to adapt to them more than they have to adapt to us. So we welcome, the different perspectives, the different ideas, the different way of thinking and being, to help us to grow and change as a department. So I think that we're very responsive, even though we have culture, we have tradition, right? But I think that we're open to change, especially now more than ever.
Mm-hmm. I took it right out. Seriously, and I never thought I'd say this. I'm older in my years now, and when I started, I know I was looked at as young kids coming on this job. They don't know nothing, but it's not that I look at people that way, the new hires and people who were like born in the 90s, that are coming on, but we learn from them. Even when I'm talking to them and, they might say a term or something that I'm like, what? Like, what is that? Oh, it's when this, that, and the other. oh, okay, now I'm becoming hip to that. But when you talk about full perspective too, and what's going on now is affecting everyone, is shaping everyone's perspective of everything. And so we can learn from how, is it millennial? We're not millennials, we're
No, we're past
generation
that. Gen Z.
Gen Z right now,
Gen Z,
right? Gen Z.
something, I don't know.
They come with their set of experiences that can help any sector, especially law enforcement. So we welcome it. We welcome it. And any person who's coming on now as a new hire, young, say, 21, you got to be 21 years old to actually be hired. But that person and say someone who's coming on at 40 years old, yeah, they're different. But when you come on this job, you're allowed to be yourself within the confines of what the department expects, right? So being open to being within the confines of what the department expects and what the expectations are, that's probably the more important part. Your personality and everything you do will shine through once you handle that first call and you're able to relate to someone. But being adaptable is probably the key.
You guys have any questions for me? I mean, I've covered civil unrest for a long period of time. I've spoken to a lot of police officers. I have officers who are family members. When I covered the U.S. Open, police officers drove us to and fro U.S. Open campus. And so I've had tons of conversations with New York Police Department officers. So,
Okay, tell me this. What can we do as a police department to better get our message across, to let people know what a great opportunity it is and how they can make a difference in their community?
I think the first thing that would help in terms of building trust so that that message can be received is something that you said repeatedly, which is when wrong is wrong, point it out. It's been my experience as a reporter in talking to activists as well as people in the various cities that I've reported in, is that there's a lack of trust, not from the 99.99% of the good things that officers do. It's that 1% that is wrong and doesn't get called out for it, and sometimes appears to actually be protected. I've made several comments about officers who have a high number of infractions who are still allowed on the streets. But there's also the question of why isn't there like some sort of directory that if an officer gets dismissed from LAPD, they can't go to a small town USA and get hired right away and maybe do some of the same things to get them fired in the first place. That doesn't seem to be in place. When I think about the officer that was involved with the shooting and death of Tamir Rice, this is someone who was literally dismissed not too far away from where Tamir was shot by him. And he was dismissed because that department said that he wasn't mentally stable enough to be a police officer. And so when you see things like that, you can begin to understand why activists as well as citizens in various municipalities don't have a lot of trust in the police department. It's like, oh, well, this person gets fired, they're just gonna go right down the street and get hired right again. There's no directory and there's nothing in place that says once you've been dismissed through some tribunal investigation that you're no longer able to be in this profession. Much in the way that lawyers get disbarred, they can't go across the street and start practicing law again. You're disbarred. I think some of the other things that would be really helpful is that you go back to some of the things that I experienced growing up. You mentioned starting a youth rec center, which was dear to me. Growing up in Detroit, we had the Police Athletic League, and we couldn't wait to leave school to go to the police station because we could play ball there. Right. And the officers would play basketball with us, and we got to know the officers. I talked about the Blue Pigs, officers who formed a band and then travel around the city and perform for the students. The more opportunities that I believe young people as well as adults get a chance to see officers in light outside of just handcuffs and guns and bad stories, I think it's better for everyone. It makes everyone's job easier. And I think the third thing that's really important that would help in terms of building trust with each other is making sure that a high percentage of the officers live in the cities in which they are policing, in which they are asked to help the community. If you can see officers off duty in the grocery store, if you see officers off duty in your church or in your synagogue or wherever you're living your everyday life, very much like your dentist or your doctor or anyone else.
Sometimes that can be problematic.
Sometimes that can be problematic. Sometimes that can be problematic.
But overall,
my point being is that if you know that the person who's coming in isn't parachuting from outside and they don't know the community in which they're serving, if you feel better about that, then you're more apt to trust a member of your community as opposed to an outsider. And that's true whether you're talking about a large, diverse city like Los Angeles or a much smaller town like, South Bend, Indiana, for instance. If officers are living and are part of the community is a lot more at ease. If we've never seen you before, and the only time we see you is when there's trouble, then every time we see you, we think trouble.
I can tell you one of the biggest thrills I received was when I was assigned to work Southwest Division. That was amazing for me because I grew up in that area. I went to Audubon Junior High, which was right, down the street from the station. And so to actually go back and, be a part of the community again, it was a worthwhile experience for me. So I can understand your position on that.
I patrolled where I grew up. The first division that I went to, I did my probation. I grew up there. So it's funny because I didn't tell a lot of my training officers. I knew where I was going. They're like, all these streets. I'm like, yeah, I know how to turn you up. And so, but it's pretty cool. It was just a great, wow, full circle moment, when they talk about that. And, but to your point, it might be an uncomfortable question for you. When you talk about perception, right, as a member of the media, what do you feel that the media can do better to put those positive images out, not just as much as, but at least put positive images of policing and police work and what we actually do when we save lives, when we do, X, Y, and Z. How do you think the media can do better in that sense? And do you think that what they do put out is inflammatory to the communities?
It's a great question. I've always been an open and honest critic of my profession. I think that's important. And we do a piss poor job of not just talking about the good work the officers do. We do a piss poor job of talking about good work, regardless of profession. True. The old saying, if it bleeds, it leads, is something that I was taught as a young journalist. And it was about finding the stories of tragedy and heartache because those were the stories that registered most with people picking up newspapers or turning on the television. And in doing that, we ended up feeding into a cycle of despair. And we weeded out those feel-good stories, or just not even feel-good stories, just reporting. If you do accurate reporting, you're going to have good stories, positive stories, because your net is wide. But if you're looking for trouble, you're going to easily find it, and that becomes addictive as both someone who covers as well as someone who consumes media. It becomes an addictive cycle that's hard to break. There are tons and tons of positive stories of officers, of members of the military, of elected officials, believe it or not, that we don't necessarily cover because we don't think it's going to register with our consumers in the same way. And that's a really bad practice. We need to get back to just telling the stories and not look for bad stories that may move the needle, but look for stories that covers the times of our day, which is what our calling is. I would also say that, particularly in cable news, where I've spent a lot of my time, we need to be a lot more selective in terms of the voices that we allow to speak on certain subject matters. If you have done the work, either as an officer yourself or as someone who has been out there reporting for years, or a community organizer or someone of that nature, then absolutely you should have that platform to talk about your expertise or what you've witnessed. But we have gotten to the habit of booking people who say things that move the needle or gets a lot of tweets. And they may not necessarily be experts in those fields. And it's a disservice to people because while it may be cool to have someone say like a really zippy line, it's like going, oh, hell, they did that. It's like, what did they actually do if they don't have any expertise and they haven't really thought about all the different aspects to the subject matter as experts have? So I think we need to get back to, we need to move away from sensationalism in this space because these are people's lives. You know, Breonna Taylor had a family that loved her, had a boyfriend that loved her, had colleagues that loved her. She was a first responder, and we need to make sure that when we tell her story, and we tell the story of the officers as well, that we don't do it intoxicated with all of the bling, 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 but we do it compassionately so that people who are watching or reading our stories can have a better understanding of what's going on in this community.
You know, I'm going to tell you, I really appreciate your perspective. I thank you much for having this discussion with us. You solicit information from us, but we also learn from you, and we can take the information that you give us to help us to do a better job in our overall, in our recruitment, in our hiring, and actually in how we perform our duties. So again, thank you very much for participating with us in this.
I'm just really upset that neither one of you tried to recruit me in this time that we've been here.
Hey, let me tell you. No, listen. So there's no age limit, right?
It's too late, brother. It's
No,
too late.
never-
It's too
never-
late. I've been rejected already.
You have a dentist that wants to become a reserve officer, so he wants to do this for free.
No, I have a dentist that wants to be
No.
a full-time officer. So
Yeah.
yeah, but no, we've hired, you know, all day,
Reserve
40s,
too, though.
50s.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've hired people in the 50s.
Really?
Yeah, so
And a
all
classmate,
walks
she
of
was
life,
47.
you know.
Wow.
And
So-
she made her butt through that academy.
So if
She
you're looking
was
for
awesome.
if you're looking for a career change, you know, now might be the time.
Let me touch base with ESPN and I'll get back to you.
Okay.
Thank you guys very
Thank you
much.
very
No,
much.
thank
Appreciate
you.
it.